more than the specimen collections. Without these records, the specimens would be relatively meaningless. The drawing of the house floor would later be used in the drafting of a final plan of the house for the published report. The final plan would look like this. This was a pole and adobe structure with a curved wall. It was next to a large and rather elaborate pit house, partially underground, which was probably a kiva, a ceremonial structure. It must have looked something like this when the people were living there about AD 950. This combination of pit house and adjacent surface structure was a common thing at Bankus Bench. Structures like these, when you find them today, look like this. A shallow circular depression where the pit house was, with an irregular low mound next to it where the surface structure was. It was possible for Frank Eddy to use machinery in investigating them. This is how he did it. First, with the machine, a backhoe, he dug an exploratory trench across the pit house depression so that he could tell what was there. In the side of the trench could be seen the house wall, plastered with clay, and a bench against the wall. The dirt that had blown in and washed in. We call this the house fill. Remnants of the collapsed roof, the roof fall. Usually, Frank stopped the machine there so as to work out the roof fall later by hand in order to learn about roof construction and, even more important, to find what was under the roof fall, the house floor itself and objects on it that were being used when the house was last lived in. As you can see, once the house was abandoned and the roof fell in, the hole gradually filled up. Usually the house fill didn't have anything in it and could be dug out with the machine. They had dug this exploratory trench across a pit house depression a week before I was there, but then the backhoe had broken down. They were waiting for it to come back from a repair shop. Eventually, it came back. Fortunately, the river was low enough just then for it to be driven across. If the water had been any higher, they would have had to stretch a cable across and tow the backhoe from the near side with the truck that was at the site. After you have dug a number of these pit houses, a system is established, starting at the very beginning when the machine is placed so that it can reach the dump truck and so that it won't dig itself onto an island. The whole thing was organized for speed, efficiency, and care. It was kept under control by having a man in the excavation, it was Frank himself in this case, who directed where the machine should dig. As the work progressed and there was more room in the excavation, he would be joined by other men. The operator was required to have some archaeological experience. He must have worked with trowel and shovel so that he would know at first hand what he was dealing with. As the work went on and the hole opened up, he was moving dirt in great quantities. Dr. Dittert had been uneasy at first about having heavy equipment ripping into his archaeological sites, because he is by nature a painstaker, and as a result, techniques were developed for using the backhoe with precision. The backhoe was not supposed to come closer than 6 inches to the wall or the roof fall underneath. Those features were to be worked out by hand. The men had to work ahead of the machine with picks to see how the wall was curving and whatever else lay ahead, so that they could guide the backhoe accordingly. As the hole got bigger, more men could move in and start the handwork. The man on the truck leveled the load and kept an eye out for stray items that might have been in the fill. He found a tubular clay smoking pipe the kind that southwestern archaeologists often call a cloud blower, because of the function such pipes still have in certain Pueblo ceremonials. Some of the charring still remained inside the pipe. Frank spent a good deal of his time taking care of the specimens that were found. This one had to be wrapped in cotton because it was fragile. You always do this immediately because artifacts like this are so easily broken. You also try to get things sacked and labeled as quickly as possible because it is easy to get them confused. For instance, they had found a lot of potsherds, fragments of pottery, in one of the houses. If they had come from the house fill, it would have meant that the sherds were later than the time the house was lived in. Having been found in the roof fall and on the floor itself, they belonged to the occupation of the house. On the bag is the information as to which house they came from, and which part of the house, and that they came from the roof fall and floor. Now they were ready to be taken to the processing laboratory in the headquarters house in Allison. In the processing laboratory, which was in the cellar of the headquarters house, the sherds that came in from the field were first dumped into water to get rid of loose dirt. This was the beginning of a standardized procedure, which would end with the sherds being thoroughly cleaned. The next step was to soak them for 15 minutes in dilute hydrochloric acid to loosen the lime deposited on the sherds by groundwater while they were in the soil. Then 2 rinsings in water. This was to get rid of the acid, so that she wouldn't get any on her hands when she handled the sherds. And then the main job, a thorough scrubbing. Some 50,000 sherds went through this whole process each summer. There was good reason for them to get all this attention. Pottery provides the archaeologist with some of his best evidence because it does not decay and it can be made in an infinite variety of styles. Once these pieces were dry, they would go back into the labeled sack for shipment to the museum lab in Santa Fe, where the main analysis and writing was done in the winter time. Sometimes a sack from the field would include the fragments of a whole vessel that had been smashed by the weight of the earth. This called for a restoration job. Work like this is ordinarily a wintertime occupation. The amount of it that went on here at the field headquarters of the Navajo project depended on how rushed they were with the washing and cataloging. When they got caught up, they put vessels together. While he was waiting for the glue to dry, he took another pot he had pieced together earlier and cataloged it. He found a good smooth spot and put on a stripe of white lacquer so that the ink numbers would stand out. Only a moment was needed to let the lacquer dry. A fine pen and India ink were used in the numbering. The sack that the sherds came from told him the proper catalog number. Anyone needing to use this vessel as archaeological evidence could look up the number in the catalog and tell that this vessel was found at the Boncas Bench site in the roof fall in the southern part of Feature 8, which was one of the houses. While this lab work was going on down in the cellar, upstairs in the living room, Polly Shafsma, an art history student at the University of Colorado, was at work on still another phase of the Navajo Project research, a study of the pictures on the rock walls in the reservoir area. Polly took me out to one of the sites so that I could see how she made copies of the rock paintings. The site was in a recess in the wall of Pine River Canyon, upstream from Albino Village. Even though it was that high, it was to be flooded by the waters of the reservoir. On the rock wall, protected by an overhang, was a panel of costumed dancing figures. The paintings were badly pockmarked. A few years before, someone with a gun had used them